The chainsaws echoed across the valley all autumn. One ranch after another cleared honey locust trees from fence rows and old pastures. The trees were considered a nuisance. Long thorns, twisted branches, shade where grass should grow. Most ranchers wanted them gone. Margaret Hale watched another brush pile burn from the hill behind her barn. Nathan walked beside her. They're clearing Harper's south pasture. Margaret nodded. I see. Nathan looked toward the smoke. You still aren't cutting yours? She smiled. No. He wasn't surprised. Margaret rarely removed something until she understood everything it could do. The honey locust grove behind the Hale farm covered nearly 15 acres. Some trees stood over 70 feet tall. Every autumn, they dropped thousands of long brown seed pods. Neighbors hated them. Cattle stepped on them. Wind scattered them everywhere. Cleanup took time. Most people burned the pods together with fallen branches. Margaret never did. Her grandfather Samuel wouldn't allow it. When Margaret was 13, she followed him through the grove carrying burlap sacks. She frowned at the ground. Why are we picking these? Samuel held up a thick brown pod. Because they're sweet. She looked confused. For people. He laughed. No. Silence. For cattle. Margaret broke one open. Sticky golden pulp surrounded shiny black seeds. She smelled molasses. Samuel smiled. The pods are richer than people think. Years later, she still remembered that smell. Sweet. Almost like caramel. Every autumn, the Hale family collected the fallen pods. Not every pod. Only clean, mature ones. They dried them naturally beneath the equipment shed. Ground them with a hammer mill. Mixed them into winter feed. Only in moderation. Always balanced with hay and minerals. It wasn't the entire ration. It stretched the ration. Samuel kept records for nearly 30 years. Weight gain. Calf performance. Winter condition. Everything. When Margaret inherited the farm, she inherited those notebooks too. One sentence appeared repeatedly. Never burn tomorrow's feed because today's pasture looks green. Those words stayed with her. The following spring, the county extension office hosted a pasture management workshop. Dozens of ranchers attended. One presentation focused on brush removal. The speaker encouraged producers to eliminate honey locust wherever practical. During the question period, Margaret quietly raised her hand. What about the seed pods? The presenter paused. What about them? They've been used as livestock feed. Several ranchers chuckled. The presenter smiled politely. In emergency situations, perhaps. Dale Harper laughed from the back row. Or if your cows like eating weeds. The room joined him. Margaret smiled politely. She didn't argue. Samuel never wasted time arguing with people who had already made up their minds. Back home, Nathan watched her collecting fresh pods beneath the trees. You know they'll keep laughing. Margaret nodded. They usually do. Autumn arrived unusually dry. Hay yields dropped across the county. Not disastrous. Just disappointing. Feed prices crept upward. Margaret filled every storage bay with dried honey locust pods. Hundreds of burlap sacks lined the old machinery shed. Nathan stared at the growing stacks. That's a lot. Margaret smiled. It'll keep. Think we'll need it. I hope not. The county coffee shop buzzed every Saturday morning. Dale Harper folded his newspaper. You hear? Rick looked up. What now? Margaret's storing tree pods. Another rancher laughed. Still. Dale nodded. I drove past yesterday. Silence. I think she's got more pods than hay. Everyone laughed. Margaret walked in carrying fence supplies. Dale waved. Morning. Morning. He grinned. How's the tree harvest? Margaret smiled. Excellent. You planning to open a squirrel farm? More laughter. She simply paid for her supplies. Then headed home. Winter passed quietly. The honey locust pods remained stacked beneath the shed. Margaret barely touched them. Hay supplies looked adequate. Nathan noticed. We hardly used any. Margaret nodded. Good. Spring rains never came. Not once. Summer arrived hotter than anyone remembered. Pastures browned by June. Ponds shrank. Creeks stopped flowing. The first cutting of hay produced barely half a crop. By July, hay prices doubled. Then climbed again. Producers began hauling expensive hay from neighboring states. Some sold breeding cows early. Others reduced herd size. The county livestock meeting became standing room only. Everyone searched for answers. Feed brokers reported shortages. Extension agents recommended reducing stocking rates. Nobody had enough forage. Margaret quietly drove home. Nathan met her in the feed shed. You thinking what I'm thinking? She looked toward the towering stacks of honey locust pods. Yes. The hammer mill ran for 3 straight days. The dried pods became course meal. Sweet-smelling. Rich brown. Margaret blended measured amounts into a balanced winter ration alongside hay, minerals, and protein supplement. She never guessed. Samuel's notebooks listed safe proportions. The cattle accepted it immediately. Nathan watched the first feeding. They love it. Margaret smiled. They always have. The veterinarian happened to visit that week. He scooped a handful from the mixer. Smelled it. Tastes sweet. Nathan laughed. You tasted it? The veterinarian grinned. A little. He studied the ration carefully. Honey locust. Margaret nodded. Grandpa used it for decades. The veterinarian looked impressed. You've done your homework. I inherited it. The drought worsened. Hay reached record prices. Every auction became crowded. Arguments broke out over bales. Margaret attended only once. She bought almost nothing. That surprised everyone. Dale stopped her outside the sale barn. You finding hay somewhere else? Margaret smiled. Not exactly. He frowned. You still got your whole herd. I do. Silence. What are you feeding? She hesitated. Trees. Dale laughed so hard he nearly dropped his hat. By late August something unusual became obvious. Margaret's cattle looked excellent. Glossy coats. Strong body condition. Healthy calves. Neighboring herds looked noticeably thinner. The county extension livestock specialist visited unexpectedly. He spent nearly 2 hours walking through the pasture, watching the cattle, examining feed, checking body condition scores. Finally, he stopped beside the mixer wagon. I've got a question. Margaret folded her arms. Go ahead. He pointed toward the sweet-smelling mixture disappearing into the feed buck. Exactly how much of your winter ration comes from those honey locust seed pods? The extension livestock specialist scooped another handful of the sweet-smelling feed. He rubbed the crushed honey locust pods between his fingers, then looked toward the cattle calmly eating at the buck. Exactly how much of your winter ration comes from those honey locust seed pods? Margaret answered honestly. About 15%. Nathan handed him one of Samuel's old notebooks. The specialist flipped through page after page. Feed records. Weight gains. Calving data. Winter body condition scores. Everything dated. Everything organized. Finally he smiled. These records go back almost 30 years. Margaret nodded. My grandfather believed memory wasn't enough. The specialist closed the notebook. I wish more people kept records like these. He spent the afternoon walking through the herd. The cows carried smooth, healthy coats. Spring calves looked strong. Body condition remained remarkably consistent despite the drought. Before leaving, he stopped beside the grove. You know? Margaret looked over. What? I think people have misunderstood these trees. She smiled. So did Grandpa. Word spread faster than Margaret expected. Within 2 weeks, ranchers began driving past the Hale farm. Not to criticize. To look. Many had already cut down every honey locust tree on their land. Others suddenly regretted burning thousands of seed pods every autumn. Dale Harper arrived one Saturday afternoon. He climbed out of his truck carrying a sack. Margaret smiled. Morning. He held up the sack. I've got a question. She laughed. I thought you might. He dumped several dried honey locust pods onto the tailgate. I found these along an old creek. Margaret picked one up. Perfectly mature. Still dry. You left a few trees. Dale nodded. Never bothered cutting those. Silence. Can cattle really use these? Margaret smiled. They've been doing it here for decades. That afternoon she showed him everything. How to sort mature pods. How to dry them. How to grind them. Most importantly, how to feed them responsibly. She emphasized one point repeatedly. They're not magic. Dale listened carefully. They're not hay. She nodded. They're a supplement. The distinction mattered. A month later, the county extension office invited Margaret to demonstrate her feeding program. The equipment shed filled with ranchers, feed dealers, veterinarians, even university livestock researchers attended. Margaret placed 3 buckets on a table. One held dry hay. One contained crushed honey locust pods. The third held her finished mixed ration. A young rancher raised his hand. So you replaced hay? Margaret shook her head. No. She pointed toward the buckets. I stretched hay. The extension specialist smiled. That's the lesson. He spent the afternoon explaining nutritional balance while Margaret demonstrated processing techniques. No miracle claims. No exaggerated promises. Only practical management backed by decades of careful records. By late winter, another surprising change became obvious. Margaret's hay inventory remained larger than expected. Nathan checked the feed shed. He counted twice, then walked into the house smiling. Guess what? Margaret looked up. What? We've got almost 160 bales left. She looked surprised. Seriously? He nodded. We've never finished winter with that much hay remaining. The veterinarian returned for spring herd checks. He compared body condition scores with neighboring operations, then quietly smiled. I've been looking at county records. Margaret waited. Your cows lost the least condition during the entire drought. Nathan looked pleased. So it worked. The veterinarian nodded. It certainly helped. Calving season confirmed it. Healthy calves arrived one after another. Strong, active, quick to nurse. Margaret finished recording birth weights. They averaged slightly heavier than the previous drought year. Samuel would have appreciated that number. The county newspaper soon published a feature story. The headline read, "Old Shade Trees Help Ranch Weather Historic Feed Shortage." Soon agricultural magazines followed. Photographers filled the honey locust grove, capturing sunlight filtering through the branches while cattle browsed beneath them. One article described the grove as a forgotten feed bank. Margaret liked that phrase. The greatest surprise came from the County Conservation District. They announced a voluntary program encouraging producers to preserve mature honey locust groves where appropriate rather than removing every tree automatically. Not because every tree belonged in every pasture, because each deserved evaluation before the chainsaw started. The district director visited Margaret personally. We've changed our recommendations. She looked surprised. Really? He nodded. We spent decades encouraging removal. Silence. Now we're encouraging management. The following autumn looked completely different. Instead of smoke rising from burning pod piles across the valley, farmers collected them. Children helped fill grain sacks. Hammer mills operated throughout the county. Feed dealers even began offering grinding services. One afternoon, the original workshop speaker from the pasture management seminar stopped by unexpectedly. He walked slowly beneath the honey locust grove. Seed pods covered the ground. Healthy cattle grazed peacefully nearby. Finally, he smiled. I owe you an apology. Margaret looked surprised. For what? I dismissed your question. She remembered. The seed pods. He nodded. I should have listened. Margaret smiled warmly. We're still learning. He laughed. So am I. By the second year, feed costs across the valley had begun returning to normal. Rain finally arrived. Pastures recovered. Hay fields turned green again. Many ranchers stopped using honey locust pods. Margaret didn't. Neither did Dale. They had learned something valuable. Good years were exactly when future shortages should be prepared for. One evening, Dale walked beside Margaret beneath the old grove. The setting sun painted the long seed pods gold. Cattle quietly grazed beneath the shade. He folded his arms. You know what still bothers me? Margaret smiled. What? I cut down hundreds of these trees. She nodded gently. I remember. I burned every pod. Silence. I thought they were worthless. Margaret picked one ripe pod from a low branch. She snapped it open. The sweet scent drifted through the evening air. You know what Grandpa Samuel always said? Dale looked over. What? Most farms already grow part of next winter's feed. He waited. We're usually too busy calling it a weed to notice. The breeze carried softly through the grove. Leaves rustled overhead. The cattle wandered quietly between the trees, occasionally stopping to browse fresh pods that had fallen during the afternoon. Years earlier, chainsaws echoed across the valley as ranchers removed honey locust trees they believe had no place in productive pasture. Most saw thorns. Shade. Cleanup. Nothing more. Margaret saw 30 years of careful records left behind by a grandfather who paid attention when others didn't. She never claimed honey locust pods could replace good hay. She never suggested every ranch should depend on them. She simply refused to destroy a resource before understanding its value. When the feed crisis arrived, the grove behind her farm quietly became